Hey, everybody. I want you to meet our mascot, Tucker.
Hi, Tucker.
Tucker!
Tricks too.
He's the best.
Hey everyone, welcome to Live It Out Now. We're glad that you're here with us. Just a reminder, we're in our new series. I think this is our third episode on our series on Overcome. And we're looking at how God can help us overcome things in our life that kind of drag us down. We've looked at fear, we've looked at shame, and tonight we're going to talk about pride.
Thanks, Kyle. So remember, the first steps of DBS is to talk about our lives. So we'll talk about the high of the week, the challenge of the week, and where do we see God at work. So I'll talk about my high and the challenge and where do I see God at work. Mine's all rolled into one. For me, this last weekend we had our garage sale, and it was a huge success. So that's a huge high. It helps us fund our mission stay. I've been talking about that for a couple weeks, so it's been a blessing and a curse. The challenges from this last week are that it's been a crazy amount of work. This last week, we worked Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all day to get this thing done, and it's just crazy.
We being the church. His church, not just
Yes,
him and Claire.
yes. Yeah, sorry, Southwest.
all by himself.
Southwest. But yeah, it's just been a crazy amount of work. But where do I see God at work? Through this kind of stuff, through the fundraisers we're doing. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that, actually more than a couple weeks ago, we did a cannon bottle drive. And at this point right now, we are over 600 bags worth of cans and bottles, which is crazy numbers. And then through this yard sale, it's just been, God is truly at work. This is something, I feel like God gave me this idea to do this mission stay, and it's coming through. He's coming through with it. So it's been really cool to see. So Kyle?
I'm going to pass to Nikki, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, mine are actually all kind of rolled into one too. Actually, wow, words are difficult apparently. But my high, we've had our kind of friend group get together. Kyle, Sam, Claire, Rebecca, me, Kirby, Cody, and we've all been friends for so long. A minute. Most of us met at Camp Yamhill.
About 20 years ago.
I don't want to talk about it. And we've got all sorts of camp stories, but I just love that our friendships have continued to grow as we've gotten older, and I love that we've all ended up back in the same community, and that we are intentional about getting together and continuing our friendships as adults. I know that it's really special that we have that, and that not everybody does, and I really appreciate it. And I see God at work through just those relationships, and I am excited to see how God uses our friendship to bless other people, as well as, obviously we are very blessed by our friendships. And then really my only challenge is that I have a lot of friends that I love that I just am not seeing, and I miss my coworkers, actually. I don't see them anymore, not even on Zoom, because it's summer and I work in education.
Yeah, I passed to Nikki because I didn't want to steal that from her because I'm kind of piggybacking on her. My high from last week is just being able to sit in my backyard with some of my closest friends and just spend some good time together. And I didn't really have any lows from the last week. It's just kind of been the same old, nothing crazy has happened. But I think Nikki said it well, like seeing how God has worked through those relationships over the years. And it's not like we've all been like the tightest of friends like all this time, but we can come back to those relationships even though we haven't seen each other maybe for months or even years perhaps. And it's just good times. And I really want to say, like, if you're younger, like if you're in middle or high school right now, like the people you become friends with is so important. And I don't say that because you got to be careful of who influences you. I mean, that's a message I heard a lot as a kid. But what's probably more important is those relationships can be so meaningful the older you get. And it's just such a cool thing. So really find those people that you just know, like, these are going to be friends for life. And do whatever you can to stay connected to them, because that was just a good reminder for me. And it's cool to see how God has worked in their lives and in my life, and how it all comes together. Like, you know, Sam and I, we were best buds in high school out at Camp Yamhill. We didn't really see each other for a couple, like really through all of college.
4 years, 5 years.
And now he's kind of back in the area, and I'm back in the area, and we've really rekindled that friendship. And so God can do a lot of cool things through those friendships is really what I'm rambling on about, I guess.
Yeah, and I would just tack on to that, you know, a lot of times I think we need to break off friendships to like go different directions. And we all went many different directions when we all graduated high school. We went to different colleges. We did different things, you know, and like really when I say we all ended up back together, I mean it. Like this was not, I'm going to go back to my friends. We just kind of all followed our own paths and where God led us. And it just happens to be that now in this time, we're all back in kind of a same community. And then the second piece is that, you know, we're intentional. So one is, you know, you can go do your own things and still keep those relationships, but there's also an amount of work that comes with, you know, cultivating really good friendships. You have to be intentional. You have to do things on purpose. And I mean, the rewards are so great.
Yeah, for sure. It's been great to just be back with friends and be able to share that time. And that's really what I think started all of this in the first place. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to our passage for today. Like I said, we're talking about pride today, how we can overcome that in our life. For some of you, maybe that's not the biggest issue. If you're like me, it definitely is. And I often need to be brought down a peg or two. So I think this is hopefully will be a good passage for us to reflect on. We're going to be in Luke 18, verses 9 through 14. This is a parable that Jesus tells, and I'm going to read, and Nikki can retell. So here we are, Luke 18, verse 9. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.
Okay, so in the story, you know, it's pretty short compared to some of our passages, but there's a lot that really happens. So Jesus is talking to a crowd, and it says that, you know, he's talking to a group of people who are prideful. These are people that, you know, think very highly of themselves and often look down upon others. So he already knows going into this is a lesson that this group needs. And, you know, Jesus tells this parable of 2 men who go up to the temple to pray. One is a Pharisee, and, you know, Pharisees were those who followed the law. And in this case, the law of the land was right in tandem with the law of the Lord, which is very separate today. But this is a time when they were the same. They were one and the same. And then tax collectors. We've talked about this before in our previous videos. Tax collectors were generally corrupt, often, you know, skimming off the top, and, you know, they were viewed as sinners. And so you've got one who does all the right things and one who is known to cheat and lie and often be dishonest. And the Pharisee, you know, prays, and he essentially says, like, I know that I do all of the right things. And, you know, I'm not like this other guy over here. And I fast, I tithe, I do all of the things I'm supposed to do. And the tax collector is very different. He's much more humble in his approach, and maybe even embarrassed, maybe even shameful, but he's won't even look up as he prays. But he does, say with conviction, he beats his breast and says, God be merciful to me, sinner that I am. So he knows, I'm not worthy, essentially. God, share your mercy with me. And what Jesus says about these two men is that, that the tax collector was in the right, essentially. For, it's the one who comes and says, like, I need mercy. Because the reality is the Pharisee who followed the law and the tax collector both need the same forgiveness, the same mercy, the same salvation. So when we're thinking about this passage, what does this passage tell us about God? Sam, you want to go first?
Yeah. Right off the bat, there's so many different stories in Scripture that talk about pride. And Jesus talks about this. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. God and Jesus talk about this throughout Scripture, this idea of, whoever's first will be last and whoever's last will be first. It's a big deal to God to be humble. It is a big, big deal to not think of yourself more highly than you ought. It makes me think back to like Genesis, where we're all made in the image of God. Everybody's equal. Everybody's on equal playing field here, and nobody's better than anybody else. And so God really, really likes people that are humble, that, that see themselves for who they are and not, better than anybody else.
Yeah, when I read this passage and I think about what does this tell us about God, there's two things really that stand out to me. The first is that God delivers mercy. God gives mercy. That's something we can learn from the tax collector's prayer. And they're both praying, and it's a good reminder that when we pray, we should seek that mercy, but we can just be reminded that God is a God of mercy. The second thing that really stands out to me is that God justifies. So Jesus frames all of this little parable, in this idea that one has walked away justified before God and the other has not. And that's a pretty big deal. I mean, because, we know that it's not our words that justify, it's God, but his desire to make us right is contingent on our hearts, our attitude. And I think we can see that come out in the two ways that these guys pray. But I'm just reminded that God justifies, and so that's really important when we think about our own pride, because a lot of times I try to justify myself. I try to make things right myself, or be perfect or whatever within my own power. If I can just control the situation and it goes right, then I've justified myself. But it's God that does that. So,
yeah, I want to echo what you both said, and then the only other thing that I would really add is that it stands out to me again, God teaching what we need. Even just the way that this passage ends: for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. That mirroring, it's as if God is taking this. Okay, you need to be brought down a peg, and you've got that part. You've got the humility down, so I'm going to exalt you. It's just this interesting. It's not. Neither one is condemned or punished or anything like that. It's just a teaching. And I think that we see that tone so often in passages we read, and it's standing out to me in this one. What do we learn about people? And I'll start and go around. But and it's interesting because I was thinking this as you guys were talking. I almost want to say that what this teaches me about people is that people are proud. But I think, even if we're not necessarily approaching things from that arrogance of, the Pharisees saying like, I have done all of these things, I've done everything right. But, it may not be arrogant. It may just be, I did all these things. So like, do I get my gold star? I think of like kids who have, done everything that they've been asked to in school or whatever. They want to go show the teacher like, I did it. I did all the things. And, that's not necessarily all bad. And it's great to want to do the right things, whatever they may be. But, that's not all of it. If we get into this pattern of thinking we can earn our salvation or earn our worth or earn love, any of those things, that only is going to hold up for as long as we can accomplish our list. And the second we hit something that we can't do or an expectation that we can't meet, our whole foundation is going to crumble. And that's why it's so dangerous. I mean, that is why pride can be so dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the point that you made about the Pharisee. We often give them a bad rap, because they're kind of like the bad guys, right, in the New Testament. But if you take this from the perspective of just like a person really trying to fulfill the law, but in that kind of self-righteous way that Jesus really spoke to, there's still pride, but maybe they're not, because when I read this in my mind, I'm thinking of this guy who he's very well dressed, and he's standing and he's speaking really loud for people to hear, and he's kind of being really sarcastic about, I'm not like other people. In fact, a lot of times Jewish people prayed prayers thanking God for blessing them, that they weren't born in poverty, or that they were born Jewish, thinking that they were born Jewish and that they could be people of God. So it could be that this guy, maybe he doesn't just think he's all high and mighty. I mean, maybe he does, but he's also just thinking, I've got it going on. And sometimes I think pride can be sneaky in that way, in that it's not just about oh, look at me. It's also about I'm doing things really well. I've got everything in my life is going well. And if I'm honest, that's a real sneaky temptation, a trap to fall into, because a lot of times there's things that are going on in my life that are going really well. And if I don't humble myself, especially when I come before the Lord, then I've really missed the point. And that's where I think this tax collector we can learn from him the most. But
yeah, and I think just a really quick tack onto that, things are going really well, I'm doing really well, can also flip to I have to fix this. And that can be really detrimental too, because we can't always fix things, especially by ourselves.
For sure.
Sam.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about what you guys are saying, because when I read this, I mean, we've all read this, or I hope you've read this before, but I see this tax collector every time I've read it. It's in my mind, like you were saying, this, holier than thou. I fast twice a week. I give tithes to all that I get. I'm not an adulterer. I'm not an exhorter. I'm not unjust. Or even like this tax collector. I just read into that so much. Sure. I don't know. I'm just kind of taking it all in right now.
Yeah, I mean, it could be very much that he's targeting this guy. I think there's definitely a range there. Jesus' teaching applies to, all those different ways that pride can manifest itself, right? So there is the very boisterous, look at me and look at how terrible these guys are. And then there's the more subtle, I'm doing pretty well. I fast, I tithe, and so.
Well, and I can put myself, the reason I'm looking at this is because I can put myself in that context, that I'm not someone that's going to get up in front of the stage and say, yeah, I'm better than that guy out loud. Yeah. But I am someone that gets up and thank God I'm not like that person, in my head.
Yeah.
And so that's what's got me, working through this is because, I've always read this as the tax collector, or not the tax collector, the Pharisees up there just ragging on this guy.
Mhm.
But you put it in the context of maybe he's just like in his head, and that just really struck me. And I'm kind of giving, answers to these next couple of questions. For me, I need to be better at that and not say, I've got this great shirt on my back. I'm a minister. I'm better than everybody else. No, I need to be humble like this, this tax collector, because that's more of the person I am, the sinful person that's standing. I need to stand at the back and be like, God, thank you so much for being merciful, because I'm just as bad as the next guy.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and in some contexts, I'm worse.
I think as Christians, we lull ourselves into this false sense that now that I've been dunked, or now that I go to church, like things are fine. Like I've arrived, and now I can start judging all the people on the outside. And we do that, I think, really implicitly. Like we probably don't think about it, but we do all the time. Consider people as less than us, even though the reality is, yes, are we saved? Are we cleansed? Yes, but not by anything we did, And we were just, Romans talks about how we were enemies of God. We were sinners, and that's when Jesus died for us. And so we need that humility.
It is, yeah, and that's so interesting because I think that there's a tie back, in our last video, we talked a lot about identity and separating, when we feel like guilt, not letting that shame take over our identity. But in many ways, I think that we let just whatever our actions are or our things that we can do in this earth become our identity more so. So we know that when we're saved, our identity is in Christ, because it doesn't matter how many good things we do or how many bad things we do. We're never going to be perfect without being cleansed by the blood of Jesus. And that goes for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so, but when we see, I don't know who would be an equivalent to a tax collector in our day, but someone we view as very sinful, and we say, well, at least I'm not doing that. Thank goodness I'm not in a situation where I have to do that, or I'm not like that, whatever it may be. In some ways, I feel that we're rooting the way we act back to our identity. Rather than being a byproduct of our identity, it's contributing to our identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it makes you kind of question, like, if we're putting ourselves in the place of the Pharisee, sometimes if we're being critical and trying to learn and grow, who is our tax collector? Mm-hmm. Who is the person that we would look at and say, thank God that I'm not like them? And that's kind of a humbling question, because, we could all put someone in that box. But again, we come back to this idea that they are the one justified because they've humbled themselves, the other one, and not the Pharisee.
Man, so good.
So
good.
I just had a thought. I've kind of lost at least half of it, but so we'll see how the other half is. But all of this makes me think about this idea of, exaltation and humility. That's where it really comes back to pride, and the Pharisee, his pride, he's really trying to exalt himself. And the tax collector is not at all. Like, the tax collector recognizes that they're sinful and that they need God's mercy. And so, like Nikki was saying, like, the inverse happens. Like, because I've exalted myself, because I'm prideful, I will be humbled, And those who are humbled, it's not like we always have to be like, woe is me all the time. It's in our humility, God lifts us up, and he reminds us who we are, and it's a positive thing. Humility isn't just self-loathing, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, actually, because I think we misunderstand what humility is all the time, even when we read these stories. And I think it's really appropriate. This is actually like back to back with our video on shame, because I think that too often we do think humility is like beating down on ourselves or downplaying our accomplishments, and it's not. That's very different. In this case, it's, coming before the Lord and saying, I know that all I have is because of you. That's very different.
Going back to what you said earlier, Nikki, I really loved the idea. I never thought of it before. This pride can lead to earning your salvation. That thinking you're better than everybody else, thinking, look what I've done. Look at who I am. I'm holier than thou. Man, that could lead to, I've done all these things. I tithe. I'm not an adulterer, so I'm better than that person.
I go to church. I go to youth group.
Yeah, exactly. I'm better. I've earned it. And that's not what Jesus says at all, ever. You cannot earn your way to heaven. And pride is so, man, I'm just shocked. The Spirit is talking to me tonight. Like, it's just, you can't earn it. And yeah.
Well, and how dangerous is it for us to think for ourselves that we can earn our salvation? Because we can't, and eventually we're going to figure that out. But also for others, like when we're talking about making disciples, if let's say you are the person that just does it all, that's, checking all your things off the list, and maybe you're not even like a jerk about it, but you've done all these things. But if that's what we're portraying it takes to be saved, then imagine someone who comes in who's new to the story, to the gospel, and we've maybe unintentionally created this idea that you have to do all of these things to be accepted into the kingdom.
Well, and when you portray that you're perfect, what happens when you mess up?
Yeah, it's
even worse. Yeah. When we portray as a church body, as members, that we're sinners and we all fall short of the glory of, or the
glory of God.
Yeah, the glory of God. Sorry, I was going to say it, but we all fall short of that. And it just, what happens when we mess up? It's bigger than that, and that's when we get called hypocrites, or that's when it turns people off to Christianity. But when we portray ourselves as sinners and are humble about it, that's when people want to be a part of this.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The ironic thing is, even though our churches talk about we're all imperfect, or however you want to say, we all make mistakes. The reality is, I don't know about your church, but at my church, there's not a lot of open confession. I think as Christians, mostly American Christians, we've become really averse to admitting that we've made mistakes, admitting that we've sinned, and confessing. And the ironic thing is, I think that's because of our pride, because we are so protective of this facade that look at me and I've done all the right things, that if we admit that we don't, then we're a fake. And that's so backwards, and it's all because of pride, because we don't want to look like we don't have it together. It's just so funny. And then this guy comes to the Lord, and all he says is, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That it's as simple as that.
Yeah. It's so one of my favorite literary quotes is actually from a John Green novel, which I wouldn't normally whip into a Bible study, I suppose, but it's from Paper Towns. And the quote is just, what a treacherous thing it is to believe a person is more than a person. And it's at the end of the book. It's the main character talking about another character. And his point is that, I thought that this girl was like this magic mystery. And no, she's just another teen figuring it out. But I think that it can be applied, to us as we think of ourselves too. We're people. We're all people. And we're all God's children. We're all his beloveds. And that's all very equalizing. We hear those things, but I think it's important to say them and to tell ourselves over and over again in these contexts.
So let's kind of just wrap things up by talking about, what else maybe the Spirit has revealed, and how we will, try to live this out now.
I'm gonna let you guys talk. I think you guys heard it already from me.
I kind of think about what's hit me most is thinking about those little ways that I allow pride to keep me from being a child of God, to keep me from coming before the Lord and just being real.
Mm-hmm.
I think it even affects my prayer life because sometimes I think, well, he already knows. I don't need to tell him all the things I've done. He gets it. But I think just I need to do that for me because I need to be willing to admit it. And again, it's not about self-loathing. It's just about understanding that I am who I am because of God. And so I need to be humble with other people and also with him, and just not try to exalt myself because it's just so exhausting, That's definitely, you guys know that's something I've talked about. It's kind of my biggest vice is trying to do everything right. And yeah, it's exhausting sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's perfect that you use the word exhausting because, similarly, I'm just reminded and I want to continue to be mindful of when I am prideful, what I'm doing is I'm causing that rift between me and God, kind of like you touched on, Kyle, but also I'm putting pressure on myself that doesn't need to be there. And by acting out that way, living out that way, be telling others that they need to put pressure on themselves that doesn't need to be there. Mm-hmm. This pressure to accomplish X, Y, and Z, to do things perfectly. And, I think, we talked about how we don't know the exact character of the Pharisee, whether he was like high and mighty, kind of a jerk or not. But I think it's really important that we talked about it because something, when I hear pride, I do think of the high and mighty kind of jerk persona. And I think the reality is pride can be a lot more subtle and a lot sneakier than that. And someone can be very prideful and come across as very kind and nice. And they may be kind and nice. I think that we are kind people, but we can also be very prideful.
Yep.
So we want to know what you heard in this story. I think the Spirit was definitely moving today. We want to know what you heard. If you heard something different, or if you agree with us, give us a like. Leave us some comments, like, subscribe, do all the things we ask. It'll help us out. We ask that you live it out now. Thanks. See you next week.